Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Obligation Bride. Chapter 1. Eli Bartlett was always expecting trouble of one kind or another. When finally it did come, he found himself surprised that it had taken as long as it had. The town of Pine Ridge, Colorado, had been far more peaceful than he'd expected. After marching endlessly during his army days, anticipating fights to break out at any moment, he had grown so accustomed to being on edge that he wondered whether he knew how to live any other way. When he came into town after a long day of working as a cowhand, his weariness was staggering. The longed-for hour of rest and reflection he enjoyed every evening in the local saloon gave him enough strength and energy to go back to work the next day. He had strung day after day together in this way until years passed, mostly without him noticing them go by. He reckoned he could live the rest of his life that way. Except, there was always that one person. Or on this particular Thursday evening, there were 6 of them. From the first, Eli had them pegged as no-good outlaws who were rushing their way to the scaffold. They had a certain look about them, an air of dishonesty which suggested they lived rough and took what they wanted. Maybe it was their hats, rumpled and faded with the sun. Maybe it was their particular odor, one that Eli recognized from men who had spent long stretches without having the opportunity to bathe. Maybe it was the half-wood, half-metal single-shot rifle propped up against their table. Or maybe it was the simple fact that all 6 of them had gathered around a table meant for 4 without even bothering to pull out any playing cards to pass the time. Eli passed by them and headed straight for the bartender. One of the local barflies, he supposed that term could be applied to himself as well, ruminated over a shot of whiskey that would take him hours to finish. Before the bartender could even ask for his order, one of the outsiders called out in a jeering, mocking tone, "What's that just walked through the door? Some kind of hippopotamosaurus? Looks more like a beast than a man." Another one of the outsiders spoke up. He was missing one of his front teeth, which caused a slight whistle to pass through his mouth. With that ugly scar on his face, he does look like an animal. "Do you think he can hear us, or is he one of them deaf mutes?" "Oh, I don't know. Difficult to say, seeing as how he only looks somewhat like a human being." "Think he's one of them, what do you call them, fairy tricksters? I heard me about them once in one of them stories." "He don't look like no fairy. Looks to me like, well, I don't rightly know what he looks like. I ain't never seen the like. Might be he's only good for shooting in the back. Doesn't seem like he'd be worth much else." By that point, Eli knew they wouldn't stop heckling him. In fact, they might lie in wait, just waiting for a chance to ambush him. They looked like the sort of men who would start trouble just for the sake of starting it. He turned away from the bartender, an action that he knew only brought his scar fully into focus for them. They were right to say that not many people had such a striking disfigurement. He touched the handle of his Cooper pocket double-shot revolver. He still had 5 bullets in it. That wasn't enough to take care of 6 people all at once should they jump him. In the single moment he gave himself before he replied, he reasoned that someone would fire back at him before he got his second shot off. He said to them, "Have I done something to offend you, boys?" He saw their faces harden, one by one. Their eyes narrowed. The man who spoke first, a man who had a hat with a hole in the middle of it, was the first to answer. "You so ugly you give offense just by being alive. I ain't never seen nobody as ugly as you. You is like a scab on the earth or some darn thing." Eli thought they might be drunk, in spite of the fact that they had not yet ordered anything. Then, he shrugged inwardly, deciding this didn't matter. He said, "I believe those are fighting words, boys." The outsider laughed at him. "And what do you mean to do about it, beast? You might move like us and speak like us, but you ain't one of us. Not by a sight." Eli took a deep breath. I believe I may have to punch you in the mouth. You want to say that again, beast? Maybe I'm a bit hard of hearing. Or maybe you got some trouble speaking like a true man. So just you go ahead and repeat what you said just now. You just go on ahead. Eli had had it. Too often he'd had to ignore such insults. But that night, he just couldn't ignore them anymore. Yet still he hesitated, not really wanting to fight, but the decision was made for him. In a flash, the stranger jumped up and was across the room. He smashed his fist into Eli's face. Eli winced, righted himself and put his own fist into the outsider's face, knocking him to the floor. There was a flare of pain in Eli's hand, a flare which quickly disappeared. Eli immediately felt someone strike him from behind, in the small of the back. He grunted in pain, then threw an elbow wildly back in the direction from where that strike had come. He heard a grunt of pain. The man with the missing tooth lunged across the table, to tackle Eli. The impact struck Eli on the arm, sending him sprawling sideways. He had just enough time to set his feet and steel himself. That allowed him to absorb another punch to the cheek that would have sent him straight down to the floor. Rather than getting dirt in his nose, he was able to respond by throwing another punch of his own. This one was a hook that caught Missing Tooth Man across the jaw so hard that the table shifted when the man banged into it. The single-shot rifle clattered to the floor. Ruined Hat Man got up, spit blood out of the side of his cheek and growled out, "I knew you was a beast. That's what they call you around here. You ain't got no manners. Uncivilized, that's what you is. Might be you'll learn after we beat some sense into you. Your daddy ain't never gave you no proper discipline, I'll wager. Might be it's time we corrected that mistake." Eli had an idea to protest by saying that he had been born in the West, that he had worked ranches south of the Rio Grande and north of the Yellowstone in Montana. They wouldn't believe him. They wouldn't even believe him if he said that he was a close personal friend of Sheriff Newton. He could see it in their faces. They had come looking for trouble, and he was just an excuse. He said, "If you don't want to get punched in the face, mister, I suggest you refrain from going around picking fights with people you don't know." Ruined Hat Man kicked a chair to the side so he could have a clear path to Eli. Someone punched Eli in the face. Then Ruined Hat Man grabbed Eli from behind, holding his arms behind him. He called out with glee, "Get 'im, boys. Time to make the beast scream for mercy." For several moments, blows rained in from all directions. Punches fell down across Eli's face, into his stomach and his chest. 5 or 6 fists hit him while Eli tried to free his arms. No matter how hard he tried, his arms were held fast. He stomped on the foot of the man behind him, yet the tight grip did not change or yield. A stream of curse words followed. Eli longed to get hold of his gun, which still lay in his holster, a familiar weight on his hip. A single shot silenced the bar. Eli heard wood splinter once again. A puncture mark appeared in the wall to Eli's left. He turned to see who had fired the gun. The shot hadn't come from anywhere close by. If it had, his ears would have heard a lot more than they did. Sheriff Garrett Newton stood across the threshold, one foot in the bar, the other outside. A tendril of smoke drifted up from the barrel of his gun, another 5-shot revolver. His right eye sat directly behind the sight of his revolver, a small metal tip protruding from the end of its barrel. He said, "Gentlemen, that's enough of that. I'll thank you to keep things civil in my town, if you please." The pressure on Eli's arms immediately relaxed. Eli took the opportunity to wrest himself free. Ruined Hat Man put a hand on his hip, right above his own gun. The outsider said, "I don't believe you know who we are." "I neither know, nor care to know. I'd like you all to either comport yourselves like honest men or find yourself another part of the country that might allow you to behave in whatever manner you please. There are God-fearing folk here. This man you was beating on just a moment ago is one of them. Now, I was minding my own business when I heard your talk. Seems like you deserved the punch in the face that you got. You got yourself a bit of revenge. Now it's over. The way I see it, all is square. Don't you agree? Ruined Hat Man grimaced sourly. I don't agree. We here, we's the Waverly Boys. You ain't never heard of us, Mr. Lawman? To my way of thinking, you ought to have. The sheriff didn't move a muscle. His eye stayed right where it was. The smoke dissipated, though everyone who saw him could tell that he still had 4 bullets left, in addition to whatever he happened to carry on his person. I neither know nor care to know that name. You're welcome in my town as long as you got coin to spend. You start getting violent, treating people in an unmannerly way, and that's when I'll intervene. Now I'd rather not shoot ya, but I will if I have to. The other man appeared not to have understood what the sheriff said. He went on as though he had not been interrupted at all. This creature here struck us first. We was just conversing a bit, is all. I'm afraid we just can't let that go, you see. Any creature what doesn't know its place must be punished. Anyone who gets in our way, well, we ain't necessarily fixin' to be all polite and civil, you see? I suggest you leave us to it. I promise you, we ain't doing nothing to no one except to those what deserve it. The sheriff's finger twitched over the trigger of his revolver. That was enough. In a flash, one of the Waverly Boys had his gun out and fired directly at the sheriff. In a single moment, Eli saw the bullet pass directly in front of him. He felt the slightest gust of air, then saw a burst of blood as the bullet struck the sheriff in the shoulder. To Eli's amazement, the sheriff didn't fall to the ground. He only turned away for a second, then turned back to return fire. Eli took the opportunity to draw his own gun and fire into the Waverly Boys. Soon, 3 of them were on the ground. The sheriff was on the ground, too. Without Eli understanding why, the other 3, one of whom was wounded, fled from the saloon, went straight to their horses, and galloped away as fast as they could. There was too much blood. Eli had not expected to see so much blood. He knelt in front of the sheriff, putting his hands into the wound. The blood was sticky, hot. There was just too much of it. The sheriff struggled to speak. Eli put his ear next to the sheriff's mouth. My bride, she's coming, and, my mother, take care of her. Tears formed in Eli's eyes. Nah, sheriff. You'll be all right. You'll be fine, you hear me? Huh? You hear me? We'll get the document. You'll see. You don't deserve to die. She's coming, the bride I sent for, she's left everything to come. She'll need. The sheriff's face grew pale, and Eli's gut twisted. I promise you, I'll take care of both of them. Whatever they need, anything. I promise. That's good. Then, without any further warning, the life faded from Sheriff Garrett Newton's body. Nothing that Eli could do or say stopped it. Eli stared at him, his mind numb. How did this happen? Was it his fault? It couldn't be true. Garrett, his only friend, couldn't be dead. He just couldn't. Chapter 2. Caroline Johnson perused the 2 letters she had received from Sheriff Garrett Newton over the past few months. Letters had started to travel much faster across the country. The first transcontinental railroad had opened up the previous year, making it possible for a person to travel between New York and San Francisco over a period of 6 days. As a person who lived in New York herself, Caroline still marveled at the rapidity with which the written word passed from one place to the other. This included not only correspondence, but books and newspapers as well. Some of those newspapers, printed less than 2 weeks ago across the continent, had advertisements that she would have never seen otherwise. Reading the newspapers had started out as a hobby to escape from the dreary boredom of everyday life. She spent 12 hours every day, 6 days a week, at the same textile factory, working at the same machine, doing the same task over and over. She needed to read about what people were doing in other parts of the country. Then her own life didn't seem as pointless. She could daydream about outlaws robbing banks, sheriffs like Garrett tracking down dangerous criminals, pastors in one-horse towns trying to survive as best they could. It was then, when she was reading a local paper printed in Colorado, that she came across Garrett's advertisement toward the back of the paper. His was the only advertisement that mentioned he was an actual sheriff, a person who could go on adventures, who lead an exciting life beyond what she knew. His handwriting was a long delineation of endless scrawled-out lines which she had to concentrate on to decipher. They were pleasant words, kind words, written with a high level of diction that indicated a solid education. He expressed admiration for her courage to reply, for she was the only one who had, and a desire to get to know her better. She wrote that she would like to know him as well. He only mentioned a belief in God once, but that was enough to convince her that he was a good man. As such, she had no hesitation in buying a train ticket out to Pine Ridge, Colorado, one of the train stops on the way to San Francisco. Pine Ridge wasn't a mining town or a cattle town, as far as she could determine. Its primary virtue was that it was simply placed in the perfect spot for a rail line to pass through. The train ride, despite being a shorter ride than a stagecoach, nevertheless dragged out. She had only brought what she could carry, leaving her bits of personal belongings, books, and collection of newspapers behind. She also left her dreary job, her dreary life, and her small ration of food behind. She'd had to eat whatever small portion of food she could manage to purchase for as long as she could remember. For a decade, at least. Sometimes, the cuts of meat she purchased gave off a rancid smell when she attempted to cook them over a Pennsylvania oven that was decades old. Though the meat often tasted just as bad as it smelled, hunger compelled her to eat it. Sickness followed. Sometimes her skin would take on a yellowish hue. Other times, she felt that she would never have the energy to stand again. Nevertheless, she always forced herself up, went to work, and did the best she could. She wasn't allowed many breaks, usually only a few minutes to use the privy. She'd seen people being fined for taking breaks. Every now and then, a woman would deliver in the factory, then go back to work as soon as she was physically stabilized. She'd seen children work to the bone. They were thin and malnourished. Maturity never hit them the way it was supposed to. Other times, the air in the factory was so foul from having so many unwashed people in an enclosed space that, in addition to the illness that she perpetually suffered, there was another illness, just under the surface. Sundays were the only day of the week during which she had any time to rest, recover, and read. Those were the days she treasured the most. Yet, in spite of all the times that she wished for a cessation of work, when she finally had it in the form of a long train ride, she wasn't sure what to do with herself. She ate better than she ever had, which left her feeling better than she could remember in ages. All she had to do with herself was stare out the window and think. When she finally did step off the train in Colorado, there wasn't anyone to greet her. In fact, she was the only one who got off the train. She adjusted her hat, grasped her suitcase firmly, and set off for the sheriff's station. Instead of finding the sheriff in his office, she encountered a funeral procession. A simple wooden casket had been placed on the back of a cart, which was pulled by an enormous animal she didn't recognize at first. It had large curving horns and a wide, muscular body. The beast carried a thick mountain of fur. She blinked a few times before she recognized it as an ox. She found the nearest person she could find, who happened to have an ungainly, ugly scar on his face that made him look deformed. "Excuse me, sir, but what's going on here?" The man's eyes watered. "This here's a funeral for Sheriff Newton." "Sheriff Garrett Newton?" She suppressed a gasp. "But that can't be right. He's the man I'm supposed to marry. I came here to marry him." "So yeah, I guess you might be. Do you have a place to stay?" Caroline looked around. She instantly spotted a hotel across from a saloon. She couldn't help but notice how run down both of them looked. She strained her eyes and thought she could detect splatters of blood on the double front doors of the saloon, but surely, she was seeing things. She gulped and wasn't sure whether to cry or shriek. She had come all the way from New York to Colorado, she had left everything behind, and the man she was supposed to marry had died before she could even meet him. Well, I guess I've got enough money for a hotel, I suppose. But, after that, The man with the scar put a hand on her shoulder, which she supposed was meant to be comforting. Don't you fret none. I promised Garrett that I would look after you. I understand you've come here on his word, and that you might have trouble going back to where you were before. Rest assured, you won't be lacking for friends here. At least, not with me. She turned away from the coffin then, trying to focus on what she had to do next. Her mind whirled. She forced herself to mentally step back. She didn't know this stranger. She didn't know anyone. What was she to do? She swallowed a sob and then she started toward the hotel. She needed a place to sleep and a place to set her suitcase. Despite the stranger's offer to help her and be her friend, she had no idea what she would do after that. Chapter 3. Caroline spent 5 minutes staring through the window of her room before she decided that she had to do something with her time. She descended the wide staircase to the bottom floor of the hotel. Only the hotel attendant who had checked her in seemed to be around. She left the building and looked up and down the street. A crowd of people were making their way toward the small church. She sucked in her breath. The funeral of her fiancé. She should be there. Bracing herself, she moved toward the crowd. The funeral was a sobering affair. Caroline had no idea what to feel considering that she had lost someone she'd never had in the first place. Everyone gathered around the gravesite, just out of town. Various people talked about how much of a good man the sheriff had been. Someone angrily burst out that the Waverly Boys, who apparently were a local group of outlaws, would get what was coming to them. Caroline got the sense that a posse would form up soon enough, one dedicated to hunting the outlaws down. She returned to the hotel after the funeral, for there was nowhere else to go. The scarred man followed her, though she wasn't entirely certain she wanted his company. She sighed, realizing that she had to have a discussion with him. To her surprise, he spoke up first. He said, "It's strange." She put a hand on her hip. "You know, Mr. Oh, I beg your pardon. The name's Eli Bartlett. Folks round here sometimes call me the Beast on account of how I look." "The Beast? Truly? You don't look like a beast." "Why, did they not just have an oxen pulling that funeral cart? That was a beast, all hairy with those horns. You look nothing like that." Eli looked away, taking his time to reply. Caroline thought that he had suddenly seen a ghost, for his face turned pale. He eventually decided to reply, and when he did, his voice cracked. "No one has ever," he coughed into the back of his hand, then continued, "seen me any other way. Easier for people to see me as less than human, I guess because it makes them feel better about themselves. I never questioned it much, not so long as I had enough food to eat and a good place to sleep each night. The Lord will sort it all out, in time." Caroline supposed that she had lived in a similar situation. People had always looked down on her because of the ragged clothes that she wore. During the winter, when she had to pay for her own wood to stay warm, her clothes had always fallen to pieces. Then every March, she would spend what little she could save up buying third or fourth-hand clothes, which would fall apart sooner or later themselves. She could remember the derisive glances, the undisguised contempt from women who carried parasols around to save them from being exposed to sunlight. They had never known her struggle to stay alive when, as often as not, she had half a mind to give it all up and let herself starve to death. Reflecting on that period of her life caused a shiver to travel up her spine. She knew only too well how easy it would be to fall back down that path once more. There had been no climbing up, no way to better herself or improve her life except by moving to a different place. She whispered to herself, "I don't want to go back. I won't." If he did hear her, he gave no sign that he did. He said, "In the meantime, you've got to decide whether you want to stay here or not. I've got a place. It ain't much, of course, if you're used to fancy things back east. I do have a house with some extra space, a barn, a plot of land, some chickens, a cow, and a cat that comes and goes as she likes. Might be we could figure something out for you there, if you've no objection. I have no place to stay on my own. I don't have enough money to stay here forever, nor do I have enough money to go back east. I think I might be stuck here." Why don't we talk about this again tomorrow? Well, I find myself somewhat confused right now. I'd like to look around a bit, and to be honest with you, I'd like an opportunity to stretch my legs. He looked out the window, trying to ascertain if anyone was out there. He said, "Yeah, let's maybe do that. This town is gonna need a sheriff, might be." "Now Mr. Bartlett, surely you're not thinking that you want the role for yourself?" With his back turned to her, he shrugged. "Ain't nobody out there will want to take the job for themselves, I don't think. Not with them Waverly boys still out there. They left 3 of their dead behind. They had to. They would have been killed otherwise, by my gun or by my fist. I think they knew that, too." Caroline tried to imagine the scene in her mind. There wasn't much about it that made sense to her. From what she had learned, 6 people had been defeated by 2, and had been run off by Eli, the single survivor of the incident. How exactly did the whole thing happen? Sheriff took exception to their remarks regarding my physical appearance. That cost him his life. I suppose you'd like to ask how it was that the 2 of us managed to turn away 6 men? Well, as it happens, one of them was armed with a rifle. That's no good in a close-quarters situation like a saloon. 3 others hadn't yet bothered to draw because they were too busy giving me a beating. Sheriff went for 2 of them. I went for 1, maybe 1 other. I know that one of them was bleeding something fierce when he rode away. They even left 3 of their horses behind. I don't yet know what happened to those horses. If they had just focused on using their guns instead of their fists, I'd probably be dead." Caroline touched him on the shoulder. That forced him to turn around and look her in the eye. A shadow passed over his face. In that moment, he really was horrible to look at. He did look less than human. There was something feral about him, something that reminded her of wild dogs she had once seen. She understood then why it was that people called him the Beast. For a moment, he looked like he was ready to open someone's throat with his teeth. She swallowed. "I don't know much about the Waverly boys, only that they sound like ruffians. Do you think they'll come back?" "Oh, I have no doubt they will. I have no doubt at all." Chapter 4. John Waverly screamed. Though he had carried a gun around with him most of his life, he'd never been shot by one. He hadn't known what it felt like to have a bullet slam into his body, to have blood all over him. Nor had he known what it would be like to have a pair of pincers dig into his body in order to pull out a slug. When he saw it, he stopped screaming. He could hardly believe that something so small had caused him so much pain and difficulty. On the ride back to his hideout, he had felt his body weakening. The blood had gotten everywhere, on his clothes, on his horse, on his gun belt, on his hands, in his hair, on his face. Yet somehow, he'd still had enough energy to get off his horse, help start a fire, and stay awake while his 2 remaining friends tried to keep him alive. "This ain't the day I die. Not today. It's not raining today," he'd muttered. He sounded like a man who had succumbed to delirium, and he knew it. He didn't much care, he had to stay alive. He would do whatever he had to do to make sure that happened. There was just too much to do, and not enough time in which to do it. Peter Waverly whistled through the gap in his teeth. "You sure are a lucky one, yes sir. Though you won't feel lucky in a minute or so." Peter turned over a bottle of whiskey, pouring some onto the wound. The liquid stung in an odd kind of way that made John grunt. He knew what was coming next. He could see the iron in the fire, burning white-hot. He tried not to think about it, tried not to let his dread overcome his reason. He would survive. He had to survive, he knew that he would. John's brother wrapped a bandana around his hand, then pulled the iron out of the fire. Smoke hissed out of the hot end, as though it were a living thing. Peter said, "Howard, give our brother something to bite down on." A chunk of wood was produced from somewhere. John put it between his teeth. He had seen other men have to do that, often when a bone saw was applied to their leg, cutting it off below the knee. John could still remember the stink of that corrupted flesh, the danger which it posed to a person's life. His wound was in the stomach. If the flesh there grew corrupt, he couldn't think about that. He would survive, no matter the cost. Peter readied the iron, hovering it right above the wound. He said, "Brother, when I press this down into your flesh, you're going to feel more pain than all the fires of hell and damnation. It's going to be the worst pain you ever felt. This here is the only way I know to heal a wound like yours. You might pass out. Just try not to break the board with your teeth." John didn't see how that could be possible. The board was so thick that he doubted whether he could break it with his hands. Then, Peter pressed the iron into his flesh. The warning he'd received in no way did justice to the pain he felt. The hot iron seared through his senses, burning everything he knew and understood. He screamed without knowing that he screamed. He was hardly even aware of anything except the immense, unspeakable agony. Time ceased to be a concept that he understood. He passed out. When he woke, he found that he had soiled himself. His brothers Peter and Abraham watched him with apprehension. Had the fire gone down, or was he just imagining that it had? He tried to push himself up by sitting on his elbows. A flare of pain shot through his stomach. He laid back down on the ground, cursing to himself under his breath. Peter stirred a pot full of baked beans over the fire. He said, "Good, you're awake. You were in a bad way there, for half a while." John checked the site of his wound. The flesh directly surrounding was fiery red. The wound itself turned his stomach, which hurt him even further. "I'm still in a bad way. Hurts like the dickens itself. Will we be riding out at first light?" His brothers exchanged a nervous glance. Howard Waverly spoke up for the first time that night. "Don't see how we can. You ain't in no fit shape to ride." John forced himself to sit up, closing his eyes against the riot of pain in his midsection. "Might be we could hunker down here for a day or two if'n we wasn't wanted men. We's all outlaws now, or did you forget that? One of us went and killed the local sheriff. They'll be after us, sooner or later. We've got to make ourselves scarce for the time being, leastways until we can figure out what we're gonna do next." Peter scooped several spoons of beans into a bowl and handed it over. "Do? Ain't nothin' we can do. Time we was moving on to a different territory, maybe down Mexico way, maybe out there to California. This here state of Colorado ain't never done us no good." John had not been able to forget the first 4 of his brothers who had died when they fell afoul of an Apache tribe that didn't treat outsiders with kindness. "We started out with 10 of us, do you remember? Now we're down to 3. I reckon we need to find more brothers. Might be we'll need to knock over a train or a bank or some such thing. And we'll need to replace them horses and firearms we lost." Peter looked doubtful. "Well, if you feel you can do it, I won't tell you otherwise. Ain't a question of whether I can or can't. This is just something we have to do. Otherwise, we're likely to end up hanging from a noose before the month is out. The 3 of us just ain't enough, even with that rifle of yours. Now you know as well as I do that we'll have to settle things in Pine Ridge sooner or later. I ain't about to let that ugly beast get the upper hand. He don't have no sheriff to hide behind this time. We let things stay as they are, he'll rouse the whole territory against us. We won't be able to go anywhere." Peter helped himself to some beans with a nonchalance that betrayed his discomfort over the current subject. "So, we're going to have to burn the whole place out, Granny and child?" John tenderly touched the wound in his side with an index finger. He winced with pain and agreed. "Granny and child. Dead folks can't talk. None will be left alive, especially not that beast of a man with that horrible scar on his face. He's gonna be the last to go. I reckon I'm gonna string him up to a tree and strip the flesh off his bones with a hunting knife. He's gonna squeal like a pig, but I ain't gonna listen. I ain't gonna hear him on that day, not for what he's done to me and my brothers. Gonna be as deaf as a tree, I expect." He groaned again. "For now, put another bullet hole in my hat, would you? Got me another quest of vengeance to carry out, and I plan to mark it on my hat like the last one." A single shot rang out through the night, clear and true. Chapter 5. Eli knew that the Waverly boys would come back, sooner or later. What he figured was the remaining members would gather 10 or 20 hired guns around them and attack the town. He had some time until that day came, though not much. He gave it about 30 days before they returned. He had seen the look of hatred on Ruined Hat Man's face as he rode away, blood staining his shirt a dark crimson color. That was the look of a man who was willing to neither forgive nor forget. The first day that Caroline spent in his house was an awkward one. Though Eli did have a spare bedroom, he'd never used it for anything other than storing his tools. He'd also never bothered with buying a second bed, as no one had ever offered to come visit him for any amount of time. For the present, he lent her his own bed while he slept out of doors or in the barn, whichever way his mood led him. The second day after Garrett's death, when Eli woke up with the dawn, he found Garrett's mother Irma Newton coming to see him upon her horse, a black translucent veil covering her face. When she dismounted, she pulled her veil away. Eli saw everything that he had feared he might see. Irma pulled her shotgun out. Though she positioned its barrel toward the ground, she kept her finger close to the trigger. Out of reflex, Eli reached for the gun on his hip, then remembered he had yet to put it on that morning. There hadn't been any reason to do so when he was on his own property. He said to the woman, "Irma, good morning to you." Irma frowned so deeply that the various wrinkles on his face deepened into caverns. She spoke in a voice that was almost a growl. "Eli. I've come for that girl you're holding." Eli brushed the dirt off his hands. "What exactly do you mean to do, coming onto a man's land with a piece of iron like that? Do you mean to shoot me in the chest?" "I might do, if you ain't willing to let go of that girl you kidnapped. I don't know her name, and I don't know why she'd come with you in the first place, as ugly as you are. I don't even know why my son would bother with a beast like you, come it to that. When you was living out here by yourself, that was for the best. Now that you're holding a woman against her will, why, it's my place to intervene, especially seeing as how you got my son killed. Now, Irma, you know good and well." Before Eli could finish his sentence, Caroline pushed open the front door, then shuffled outside, still wearing her night dress. She rubbed at her eyes, then stretched out her arms above her while she yawned. She looked startled to see they had company. "Who's this? What are you doing here?" "Young missy, my name is Irma Newton. I'll thank you to come with me this instant and leave this scamp behind. I'm sure he's told you some pretty lies, and made some well-meaning promises, but in the end, you can see by his face what his promises are worth. You needn't fear him any longer, for I'm here to rescue you." "Rescue? Whatever do you mean?" "Eli has been kind enough to give me a bed to sleep in so I can avoid having to spend all my money at the hotel. He's never done me a bit of harm." "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Irma tromped forward and grabbed Caroline by the wrist. Eli stood and watched for a moment, not sure if he should intervene, or even what the proper course of action for him ought to be. Caroline cried out, pulling back. She held onto her wrist, away from Irma's grasp. Irma reached out for the other woman a second time. "Come now, you don't know what's best for you. You shouldn't be with this man. He's not like the rest of us. He isn't to be trusted." Caroline stepped back again, this time stumbling backwards over the steps behind her. "Stop grabbing at me. Or at least have the courtesy to put away your gun before you speak with me. My goodness." Irma Newton then seemed to remember that she was still carrying a shotgun. She groused, "Well, just you remember that he led my son to a bad end. My son, the sheriff of this town. He never done wrong to nobody, and then for no good reason at all, he's dying on the floor of that filthy saloon. He'll lead you to a bad end as well, if you ain't careful. Mind what I said now. You mind what I said, if you want to live a long life." Eli put his hands on his hips, with a half a mind to tell Irma what he really thought of her then and there. He took a breath, forcing himself to relax. "Mrs. Bartlett, I'm sorry for what happened to your son. You can't know how sorry, but he died on the job. He was a brave man, and a true friend. Irma mounted her horse, then sniffed audibly. He wouldn't have died if he hadn't been such good friends with you. You're a dangerous person to know, Mr. Bartlett. It's better that you don't show your face in public. Bad things tend to happen when you do. If you was to spend the rest of your days here in your house, minding your own business, I'm sure ain't nobody would mind. You come into town again looking to cause trouble, and I'll shoot you myself. Good day to you. Eli's fingers twitched for a lack of something to grab onto too. He turned away from the woman, wondering if anybody else in the town thought as she did. He reckoned that a few of them had to, even if they were polite enough not to say so. Caroline dusted herself off and said, "What is her problem exactly?" "Nobody I've met so far said half of what she did." How incredibly rude. Eli couldn't help staring after the horse Irma rode upon, even after it was well out of sight. By the time he thought up a reply to what Caroline had said to him, she was already back inside, preparing breakfast. Chapter 6. Caroline rode into town a few hours later, wanting to confront Irma about what had just happened and wanting to get more information about how the sheriff had been killed. She left Eli behind and, strangely enough, he seemed only too happy to see her go. She pondered what this might mean, trying to figure him out. On the one hand, he appeared only too willing to welcome her and help her, while on the other hand, he was comfortable enough pushing away. She recalled that he had promised to take care of her, and yet how to explain his behavior? She didn't know where he stood or what he wanted. Nor did she understand why he was content to take that old woman's abuse when any other man would have walked her off the property. The town of Pine Ridge was much as she remembered it from her very brief stay. The town was situated on a flat plain that stood before a tall series of mountains upon which forests grew. At the tops of those mountains, she could make out caps of white snow regardless of where she was. Although this suggested that it was very cold indeed at the top of those mountains, the town itself was pleasantly warm. A conglomeration of buildings sat on either side of a wide street. When she stood in front of the empty sheriff's office, she could make out the train station and the rails beyond it. She traced the rails toward the mountain and realized, with a start, that someone had cut a wide, long tunnel in the mountain itself so they could pass a train through it. No matter that a stone archway had been built over the entrance, the darkness she sensed inside the tunnel seemed to her unfamiliar, even sinister. On a whim, she tried to open the door to the sheriff's office. It was locked. An elderly man passing by called out to her, "Miss, if you're looking for the sheriff, you won't find him. He's dead, I'm afraid." Caroline smoothed out the creases in her dress with her thin hands as best as she could. She turned to see a wiry old man wearing a black suit and a wide top hat that made him look like a carnival master, or a politician. He wore a thin pair of spectacles that appeared one size too small for his eyes. He walked with a cane, one that reminded her of the owner of the textile factory where she had worked previously. She tried to comport herself as a schoolteacher might, even though she didn't know how that was done exactly. But she knew teachers were respected women, and she wanted a taste of that. She still had her bonnet on, and still kept her hair up tight around her head as a woman of class might do. It was possible, she thought to herself, that someone might take an interest in letting her teach school in town, or somewhere nearby. That would be a fair sight better than going back to work in another textile factory just to break her back for barely enough to survive and to have a few spare minutes to read newspapers on Sunday afternoons. "Yes, I'm wondering if you had it in mind to appoint a new sheriff? I've heard there was shooting around here recently." The old man took off his hat and pressed it against his chest. "Well, madam, if you only heard about it, you must have come off one of the trains that have passed by recently. There was indeed a fair bit of shooting the other night, I must say. The ruffians in these parts are most intolerable. If I had my way, I should like the young men of this town to form up a posse to go after them. That sort of unwarranted violence must not go unanswered. But, as it is, we don't have a proper sheriff anymore. Mr. Newtown was the only man for the job. I don't know if there's anyone else who can apply themselves as well as he did. Perhaps you'd like to put Mr. Bartlett in that position? From what I've heard, he's an honest and fair man." The old man's eyes widened, and his mouth fell open. He dropped his hat, then stooped over with difficulty to pick it up. Oh my, there's a novel idea. Honest and fair, he most certainly is. But as to his appearance, well, I can't say that he evokes an air of trustworthiness. I shouldn't know whether he would represent his own interests or that of the town at large. That is a matter which bears some consideration. He might be a good candidate except that he hasn't volunteered. If only it were possible to completely heal that scar of his, he'd be the ideal person for the job. Well, sir, I hope you're able to find the man that you're looking for. Yes, I certainly hope so. Incidentally, I don't believe I've had the pleasure of making your acquaintance. Caroline extended a hand. Caroline Johnson, at your service, sir. From New York City, if you've no objection. He shook her hand and gave her a dry chuckle. How could I have an objection to your place of origin? You've certainly no control over that. For my part, I am Lucas Abernathy, of Abernathy and Sons, Limited. I am, I fear to confess, a man of some repute about this town. I suppose you might say I'm closest thing this town has to a mayor. Then, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, sir. And, may I say, though I haven't been here long, I don't believe you'd go far wrong hiring Mr. Bartlett to be your sheriff. After speaking the words, Caroline wondered at herself. Just why was she so bent on having Eli become sheriff? So, you're acquainted with Mr. Bartlett, I take it. Caroline flushed. Only enough to know that he seems honest enough. Well, that's as may be. I don't have unilateral authority. The decision isn't mine alone. However, I shall give it due consideration. Of that, you may rest assured. Now then, if you will excuse me, I have business I must attend to. Good day to you, Miss Johnson. Chapter 7. The pain in John's stomach never went away, not fully. The first few days of riding between the mountains of Colorado were the worst. His wound throbbed. He had difficulty concentrating. In fact, had his horse not been accustomed to following the two other horses in front of it, John might have lost his way entirely. There were times when his vision blurred. There were times when, despite his familiarity with riding around the country, he lost his sense of direction. He might as well have been floating along a river, letting the current take him anywhere it wanted. After 4 days of riding and subsisting off the animals they managed to catch and the porridge they managed to boil, he regained his senses. He started to see things clearly once more. It occurred to him that he might have been suffering a fever which had suddenly broke. That felt like the right explanation for what he had gone through. There had been talking during the days when he had been unable to concentrate. He hadn't been able to follow the conversation. Bits and pieces of it floated through his memory. He tried to recall them, yet they slipped through his fingers like shards of broken glass. He recalled what he had been trying to do, what he had planned. He put a hand to his hat and felt the second hole there, a hole that allowed air to pass through. That was a strange sensation whenever a breeze kicked up. He asked his brother, Peter, "Where are we going?" "We's already got some horses we're gonna steal. We been on their trail for 2 days now. We gonna take them for ourselves, then we's gonna rob a train. You might remember we figured out the schedule of the Transcontinental. There's another train coming through in 3 days. You told me that, remember?" John did remember that. He had it in mind, long before they ever went to Pine Ridge, that they would eventually rob a train. Those trains went from New York to California, and then went back the other way as well. The ones going from California to New York carry gold what comes out of those mines. That gold is stored in local banks. Sometimes, the banks are robbed. Lately, though, the banks and the vaults are increasingly tough to get into. You'd have to dynamite the whole building and carry away the vault yourself. Then you'd have to open it somewhere else before a posse catches up to you. Then you'd have to find a way to hide it, or save it, or do something to make sure it's yours. Bury it, maybe. Peter replied, "Yeah, that's what you said. That's what you said before. I remember saying that. I'm just thinking out loud, you might say." Robbing a train is a lot easier. You've got the horses there. You just need to make sure that there ain't no security men to get in your way. With just the three of us, I'd say it's a gamble." Peter looked back. He had the dust of the road on his face. He looked like he had been riding for a while without much rest. He even sounded exhausted. "So you're counting yourself as being able to participate? I hope that means you're feeling better." "Nah, I still feel terrible. Only, there's work to be done. Might be we don't have much time to do it." The metal badge sat uncomfortably on Eli's chest. He was only too cognizant of the fact that he had the position only because no one else wanted it. He drew stares from people who passed him by on a daily basis. He also had to find someone else to take his job as a cowhand, a job he wasn't sorry to leave behind. He was sorry that he couldn't get to know Caroline as well as he might have liked. Much as he didn't want to admit it, Irma Newton had made a valid point. He did ruin the lives of those around him. He couldn't let Caroline into his life, but he could put his power to good use. He could ruin the lives of criminals who had it coming to them. Thus far, in his first few days as sheriff, he hadn't met anyone who needed arrested. He hadn't been able to convince anyone to form up a posse to ride after the Waverly boys, either. They counted on him to get the job done, even while they struggled to look him in the eye. It didn't take Eli long to figure out that they were only too happy to use him as a sacrifice to keep the peace in the town, because they would have rallied behind Sheriff Newton, one and all. The problem was, he found one person only too willing to learn how to shoot a gun, the last person that he would have expected. Caroline had taken to using a long rifle. She had tried a revolver and a shotgun, weapons that Eli now had access to as the sheriff of Pine Ridge. The rifle, despite being a bigger weapon with a bigger stock and longer sight, fit her hands better. Eli could tell when she handled the rifle as opposed to other firearms. He'd taken her to a spot in the forest where he'd worked on his aim. He'd set up glass bottles on several tree stumps at the foot of a mountain near the town. He watched her movements and facial expression to see how comfortable she was. As far as he could tell, she looked like a natural. She wasn't timid or hesitant in any way. He gestured to the bottles. "All right, I guess since you want to learn, I might as well show you the right way to do it. When you're using any firearm, the most important thing is to keep your finger off the trigger before you want to fire. You want to keep it over that little guard there. Okay, like that." She took aim at one of the bottles, looking down the gun sight. "Like this? That's a start. Only, you want to keep the handle of the gun against your arm muscle, not your shoulder. Don't let it rest against your shoulder. The gun that you're holding has a bit of a kick to it. You will feel it when you fire. If the kick is too much for you, the muscle of your arm is a better place to receive it than your shoulder blade. Your shoulder blade will break, your muscle will just bruise." Caroline put the butt of the rifle against her bicep muscle. She still didn't look intimidated, even after he mentioned the possibility of injury. "How do I know what I'm firing at?" He looked down the barrel of the rifle to make sure that she had her aim right. "At the end of the barrel, you'll see a little piece of metal rising up there. Do you see it? That's your sight. Now the idea is, you want to hold your gun as steady as possible and line up the sight with what you're aiming at. Okay, is it all right to put my finger on the trigger now?" Eli took a step back so as not to crowd her. "Only put the finger on the trigger of your gun when you're ready to fire it. If you have any doubt in your mind, if you're unsure in any way at all, don't put your finger on the trigger. Not even once. You need to be absolutely certain what you're going to shoot before you do it. If you're not certain, then you're just firing blind. You're going to waste your bullets that way. Or, even worse, you end up hitting something you don't mean to hit. When you shoot someone, you can't take it back. With a gun like this, when you hit them in the arm or leg, chances are they'll lose that arm or leg. If you're not ready to kill someone, or cripple them for life, then keep your finger off the trigger." Caroline focused intently on the bottle some distance away. She put her finger on the trigger. "I'm ready to shoot it. Can I shoot it now?" "When you pull the trigger, there's going to be a blast. It's very loud. It might hurt your ears. The gun will kick on you. You have to be prepared for that as well. It's not like in the books that you might have read. In my case, newspapers. Eli grinned. Okay, newspapers. Some of them have stories in them. You'll find that guns are very different than the way they've been described to you. The feeling that they give you, it's not something you read about all that often. Go ahead and try it. See for yourself. A moment passed while Caroline considered what she ought to do next. Then, she pulled the trigger. The rifle roared out a single blast. The bullet struck the top of the bottle, shearing off its neck. Oh, I hit it. I actually hit it. How are you feeling? Are your ears hurt? Is your shoulder okay? It was a bit of a surprise. I'll admit that. But I think I'm all right. I can try again, if that's okay. Eli held out a small box full of bullets. Now I'm going to show you how to load and unload your gun. At first, this will probably go slow. Now that you've fired a bullet, you have to unload it. Once you do that, I'll show you how to load the next one. This gun only fires one bullet at a time. Be careful how you load it. If you put the bullet in backwards, or do it the wrong way, you could jam it up. A jammed gun is worth about as much as a brick in your hand. That's all it will be, just a weight in your hand. Caroline said, "Okay, show me how." Chapter 8. Caroline's ears were still ringing several hours later when she went to the local church to figure out when services would take place. As it was a Saturday, she wanted to know whether they held Sunday school. She hoped they had services in the afternoon or evening. The church she'd attended in New York only had a single hourly service on Sunday morning, and many still fell asleep. Sleeping in church had been such an epidemic that the minister brought it up at least once every month. From the outside, she couldn't tell whether the church was Catholic, Protestant, or otherwise. There wasn't anything to make it recognizable as a church other than the steeple at the top of its roof on top of which stood a cross. She'd have known anyway since it was there that she said goodbye to the man she'd never even greeted. She pushed one of the doors open. The church was scrunched up so that a single person could only walk down the middle aisle at one time. Each of the pews, 8 on each side of the aisle, looked as though they could only hold a handful of people cramped together. The carpet between the front door and the rearmost pew was worn down so much by foot traffic that she felt the indentation as she stepped forward. At the front of the church, right in front of the nave, Caroline saw an unfamiliar woman kneeling, her hands locked in prayer. Since the church schedule was posted on either side of the front door, there was nothing left for her to do except pray herself. She sat down in one of the pews. She mumbled under her breath, "Dear God, please don't let the Waverly boys come back to town. Please don't let anybody get killed. Please protect Mr. Bartlett and, let him, well, that would be selfish." She sighed, wishing that she could verbalize what was in her heart. Eli was a good man. She could tell that, even from having known him for just a handful of days. She just wished that he would let her in. Even after being appointed sheriff, he still slept out of doors or at the sheriff's office. She dreaded his discomfort when it rained or snowed. The floorboards nearby creaked. Caroline looked up to see a middle-aged woman with bags under her eyes and gray streaks in her hair. She wore working boots that were stained with mud, as was her heavy skirt. She wore a flannel shirt that had sweat stains under her arms. There was a clear, proud look in her eyes. Caroline had seen that look before, had seen it all too often. That was the look of a person who worked for a living and never had to apologize to anyone for it. The other woman extended a hand. "Good afternoon, miss. I don't believe we've met." Caroline stood up and shook the woman's hand. She said, "Yes, I've been getting that a lot lately. Caroline Johnson, from New York." "Oh, Johnson. You must be the woman that my son let into his house. He's been busy lately. My name is Violet Bartlett. I can't wait until tomorrow so I can see him again. He doesn't like me coming to his place. He thinks he has a corrupting influence on the people around him, or some such thing. It's all foolishness. Yet, I try to honor his wishes as best I can. He's had such a difficult life. Caroline couldn't help but feel sorry for Eli. Even as the sheriff, he was still ostracized, treated like he didn't belong. She could sympathize with someone who worked as hard as they could but nevertheless didn't see any reward or suitable compensation for their labor. She knew what it was to not be welcomed because of circumstances outside of her control. She knew that only too well. Bartlett? So, it's Eli you're talking about? Violet gave a friendly smile and a nod. Yes, I'm his mother. We all have been living out here in Colorado for about 15 years or so. So, you've been staying with him then? Did he tell you the story of how he got that scar on his face? Caroline shuddered to think of it. That scar, that hideous, ghastly scar, was what caused everyone in Eli's life to treat him as less than human. As a being not worthy of compassion or consideration. She couldn't imagine what horrible event had happened to him that would cause a disfigurement like that. She shook her head. No, he never told me, and I haven't asked. I figure it's a sensitive subject for him. That's an event which has changed his life, and much for the worse from what I can tell. Really, I'm just a stranger in his life. Even though I stay in his house, he keeps himself at arm's length. I figure the day will come when he'll get tired of having me around and tell me I have to go. I expect he'll pay for my train ticket back east. Violet sat down in one of the pews, so Caroline did as well. The other woman said, yes, that does sound like something he would do. His heart is full of kindness. He's helped all kinds of people hereabouts. Everyone forgets that when he keeps so much to himself. Then other folks, who haven't been helped by him, think he means to be alone. They think he's unfriendly, so they talk about him like he's less than human. Of course, it's difficult for him to trust people when they don't trust him. I'm not even sure which one came first. Now, he's an outcast in spite of being the sheriff and all. Maybe people will warm up to him, given enough time. Caroline thought to herself, if he stays alive that long. Violet flipped idly through a hymn book. She opened it at a random spot, without even looking at the page before her. Caroline glanced at the song. Along the Silent Path. The hymn was a short one, as far as she could tell. She couldn't read the musical notes. She'd never had the time to learn anything about music, she had always been too busy working. Violet continued, I can still remember him as a child. Such a bright, energetic boy. He had a love for reading. He never bothered nobody. Always had a kind word to say. Until our house caught on fire. I don't know what started it, rightly. Might have been that the husband who left me came back to have his revenge. Might be we just got careless. I don't know. Only, I was caught in the flames. I only woke up because I was coughing on account of all the smoke. I screamed in terror. I thought I was going to die. Then Eli appeared. There he was, 12 years old, scared out of his mind. Fire stood between him and me. The only way for him to get to me was straight through it. He didn't take long to decide. He rushed headlong into the fire. It was his face that took the brunt of it, the side of his face to be specific. His arms got it on the way back. He doesn't show his arms all that often. You might have noticed that he wears long sleeves even in warm weather. Caroline hadn't noticed that. She hadn't paid much attention to what Eli had worn or not worn. She hadn't been in Colorado long enough to figure out what people liked to wear on a regular basis. When she thought about it, though, she found that Violet was right. So, Eli was just as self-conscious about the scarring on his arms as he was on that scarring on his face. Some of his scars looked like they had been caused by a blade, they looked like his skin had been torn open, only to heal badly later. Other parts of his face looked discolored, as though from an odd sort of bruising. The scarring looked like one big damaged mass, at first glance. Caroline had never stared at his face for too long, afraid of making him uncomfortable. She blinked back the tears she felt welling up to the surface. And, from the looks of it, he managed to save you and keep you from being badly burned. Yes, that's true. He kept me from the worst of it. We survived, but our house burned down. We built a new one, of course, well, mostly me. He wasn't up to moving around and working for several months afterward. The doctors that I spoke with said there wasn't anything that could be done, except to keep him safe and keep the wounds as clean as possible. Eventually, he healed up. He just couldn't live in our new house. He couldn't look at himself or me. You might have noticed that he doesn't own a single mirror. Hair only really grows on one side of his face. Caroline hadn't gone through his house. She'd only been in the kitchen, her bedroom, and the outhouse out back. The lack of a mirror hadn't drawn her attention. She'd owned only a foggy, cracked mirror herself, one that only really allowed her to see if her hat was on straight. She had just assumed that Eli only bothered with what he could afford. She hadn't paid attention to the hair on his face either, except for the one time that she saw him shaving the unscarred half of his face and not the other. She looked up from the hymnal to Violet's face. The other woman appeared on the verge of tears herself. Caroline said, "I'm so sorry. The world is a terribly cruel place." It is. It really is. People are judgmental and awful 6 days a week. But then once a week, every Sunday morning, they are the very soul of compassion. I have grown skeptical of the human race. They just don't know how much everyone around them sacrifices just so they can stay alive themselves. They only think of themselves. When I have the time, I come here to pray for compassion. I pray that my heart may not grow hard from everything I see around me. It's too easy to become cynical, to lose faith. Caroline wondered if she had lost faith herself. When she thought about New York, she could only think of it as a place full of suffering and hardship. Perhaps that was how Eli saw Pine Ridge. She said, "I never knew any of these things. I didn't know anything. He's gone through a lot, hasn't he?" "Yes, he has. Why, I even got a visit from Mrs. Newton the other day. She claimed that you had been kidnapped by my Eli, which I knew was a bald-faced lie. Irma would never have dared to say such a thing when Sheriff Newton was around. Her son wouldn't have let her get away with that. He was such a good friend to my boy. And now he's dead. She's not the only one who blames him for Mr. Newton's death. Others are as liable to turn on him as those Waverly boys. And I fear they are going to come back." Caroline nodded slowly. "Yes, Eli told me that those boys would return. He's been teaching me how to shoot. I probably ain't going to be of any use if a fight comes up. I just know enough so as not to blow my own hands off." Violet's eyes widened with surprise. "Well now, if them boys are fixing to come back, they're gonna have a warm welcome indeed. I'm a good hand with a gun myself, though of course, I prefer the revolver. I ain't gonna let any harm come to my son if I can help it, even if I have to break the Lord's commandments. If you want to help me, why, that would be much appreciated." Caroline swallowed. She wasn't exactly sure what she was getting herself into. She had spoken without thinking, only realizing after she did speak, that she might have committed herself to something she wasn't ready for. Her voice shook slightly as she said, "Yes, all right. I'll stand there with you, if I'm able." Chapter 9. They had to figure out when the train coming back from California would slow down enough so that horses could catch up with it. John Waverly touched his stomach, trying to ignore the pain that came with every movement of the galloping horse beneath him. The wound hadn't improved all that much since he had received it. He had stopped bleeding directly after the iron had been applied to his flesh. That was a small blessing at least. He pushed the pain to the back of his mind, as far as he could. When their horses had caught up with the train and he was right next to a door he could open by himself, he gave the signal. He and Howard stormed the train, while Peter rode slightly behind them with the extra horses. They had all decided that Peter's rifle would be of much more use outside the train than inside it. Although he wouldn't say it out loud, Peter was also better at handling horses than John or Howard. John jumped off his horse and landed on the flat metal surface. Howard followed directly afterward. John took a look around. He was in a storage car. Wooden boxes filled with hay lay all around him. He asked his brother, "Which way?" Howard pointed directly ahead, toward the engine car. "They keep the gold near the engine. That way, in the event of a robbery, they can detach the back cars and deliver the gold to its destination. There's only one car with anything valuable in it. You'll know it when you find it." "Okay, let's go." John opened the door that led to the next car. There was a ladder on the back of the car in front of him. Through the rushing air, he jumped over the connecting braces, then grabbed onto the ladder. When he got to the roof, he felt a sudden gust of wind that nearly blew him off. He had to focus to keep himself strong enough to proceed forward. He saw the engine car easily enough. The smoke that rose up from the engine was difficult to miss. The closer he got to the engine car, the more he was able to identify the car with the gold in it. That car was unlike the others. It appeared to ride a bit lower to the ground, hopefully because there was considerable amount of weight in it. John peered over the side and gave a signal to Peter, who had slowed the horses down somewhat. He was still in view, though fading fast. The horses would have to rest and recover in order to have as much strength as they could for their getaway. It wouldn't do to have them grow exhausted before galloping all the way back to the hideout they had chosen. He motioned to Howard, indicating that they were going to go ahead with their plan. He ran up to the edge of the car, then jumped over. He landed awkwardly on a pile of logs. From there, he went to the next car and the one after that. When he got to the protected car, he looked for any kind of opening on the roof. There was none. They'd have to go in through the side window. Howard joined him on the roof. He secured a rope around a corner metal loop at the edge of the train car roof and tied the other end around John's waist. John adjusted the rope up higher under his arms to avoid his wound. He prayed he'd make it through this heist without bleeding out. John tested the rope by pulling on it. It seemed secure enough, though with enough repeated pressure, it could come loose. He looked down over the roof and found the nearest window. Then he got on his belly and slid over the edge of the roof feet first. His feet collided with the window, spraying glass everywhere. Climbing through the window, John quickly loosed the rope and let it go, knowing Howard would use it next. Turning, he saw 4 armed guards standing around what John was sure were bags of gold, piled one on top of the other. The guards had drawn their weapons the moment John burst in. One of them cried, "What the devil? Put your hands up." John put his hands up, desperately looking about for an escape. How could he warn Howard? "You're under arrest. Unlock your gun belt and let it fall to the floor." John was about to do that when behind the guards, all of whom had been paying attention to John, another window exploded. Then Howard was there, firing his gun into their backs. Bullets ripped through their bodies, and blood spurted and sprayed everywhere. John drew his own gun and fired off 5 successive shots. The guards all fell to the floor while John reloaded. The floor grew now sticky. John said, "All right, take the gold and throw it out the window. Peter will pick it up." Howard started throwing the bags of gold out of the nearest window. John decided to fire his last bullet into the man who'd told him to put his hands in the air. The sound of the shot was gratifying. The weight of the gold in his hands, even more so. He pitched bag after bag out the window, too, watching the train continue on as though nothing had happened. When all the gold was finally outside the train, Howard said, "All done. Let's move. Pine Ridge is close. The train will likely stop to use the telegraph once they figure out what happened." John grimaced. "We got to take care of the gold first. While I'm thinking about it, strip these men of their weapons and ammunition. We'll need it all for the coming battle, when we burn Pine Ridge to the ground." Eli had both looked forward to and dreaded Sunday all week long. Now that he was the sheriff, he knew what he had to say, and he knew that Sunday was the only day he would have to say it. He got to church early, finding it empty of everyone except Betty Hargrove, who played the organ during every service. She was busy practicing, but filtering out the noise was easy. He knelt down and prayed. It was all that he could do. He didn't notice the preacher come in with his mother in tow. Violet approached him from behind while the preacher walked to the front of the church. "Eli, my dear son." Eli didn't even know what he had been praying for or about. He had been so lost in himself and his thoughts and worries. He stood up, his knees hurting. The burn scars on his arms, which he tried not to think about as much possible, flared with pain more than usual. He could still see the flames in his mind, still felt their intense heat upon his skin. Seeing his mother reminded him of the heat, though he could never tell her that. She would only feel bad if she knew, and she was the last person in the world who deserved to feel bad. "Ma, it's good to see you. Why haven't you married that Johnson woman yet? I spoke with her yesterday. She's a kind soul. She doesn't look at you like everyone else does. She sees like for who you are." Eli shuddered at the thought. "People shouldn't be around me. I'm not good for them. You know what happened. It was because you were too close to me. I started the fire. I didn't mean it, but it was me. I forgot to put out the fire in the oven. I didn't know the stove would overheat. I didn't know the flames would spread to the wall behind the oven. I didn't know, but I'm still at fault. It's my responsibility. I'm to blame. You're better off not being around me. So is Caroline. Please don't ask me to marry her. She deserves to be happy and healthy. She can't be so around me." Violet put a hand on his shoulder and spoke in a low, quiet tone. "Son, don't be ridiculous. That fire wasn't your fault any more than it was mine. The stove was faulty. That's all. I hope one day you are able to see how wrong you are. There are people who love you, people who want to be in your life. Shutting yourself away from them won't do you any good. It will help them, keep them safe from me. You know what they call me here. They really should call me bad luck." Violet put her arm around him. Her body was warm, her voice soft and tender. "What happened at our old house wasn't your fault. It was just an accident. How many times do I have to tell you? I've been telling you for years. And what happened to Sheriff Newton wasn't your fault either. That was the Waverly boys, them boys with guns. You've got to stop blaming yourself. It ain't right." Eli hugged his mother. He was glad that she was there. He spoke to her under his breath, so only she could hear. I want to be able to love someone and be loved in return. I want to not have to worry. I want this curse to go away. I want that so badly." Violet said 4 words that stayed with him, that he kept hearing over and over in his head the rest of the day: "There is no curse." Chapter 10. Caroline watched as Eli walked behind the pulpit. She had enjoyed the singing and the sermon. For once, she didn't have to listen to a lecture on how people ought to stay awake to listen to the Word of God. Instead, the message had revolved around how the people of Israel asked the prophet Samuel to appoint a king to rule over them. Samuel warned the people that a king would abuse them and treat them badly. They still wanted a king anyway. Everything Samuel had warned them about had come true under their new king, Saul. Even the next king, David, had not been a paragon of virtue. Then had come Eli's turn, the sheriff with a large scar on his face, the man that few people trusted, least of all himself. Rather than the insecure, worried man that Caroline thought him to be, when he stepped up before that pulpit, she saw in him something that she had never expected. He appeared confident, in control. The badge on his chest looked like it belonged there. "Okay, well, thank you all for listening. Or, I suppose, thank you for staying to hear what I'd have to say. Preacher, thank you for giving me the time to speak. I'm addressing you all because we all have a common problem. This past week, a gang of outlaws calling themselves the Waverly Boys came and shot up the saloon. Some of you here were there to see it. Sheriff Newton gave his life in defense of this town, in defense of me. I've accepted the position that he once had so I can bring this gang to justice. However, they're not the type of people to leave well enough alone. They will come back. I doubt they'll just go back with the 3 they left with. The only reason they would leave and not shoot it out then and there was if they weren't sure they would win. I sent out a telegraph to the sheriffs of other towns. Turns out, these boys are quite notorious for never giving up. You kill one of them, they'll kill 10 of yours. That's how they work. Now they've got their sights set on this town. You might not believe that. Today is a peaceful day. Tomorrow might be a peaceful day, too. One day, though, they will come. They won't stop until they get what they want. When that day comes, I ask you to take a stand with me. I will be the first out there to put myself between you and them. I will protect you as much as I'm able. Who among you are willing to join me? Caroline saw at once that the majority of the congregation looked down at their feet. Violet was the first to stand up and join Eli behind the pulpit. I stand with this town. I stand with my son. No one else stood up, not at first. Caroline pushed herself to her feet. She walked up to the pulpit to stand on the other side of Eli. I'm no good with a gun since I'm just learning. I'm not even sure I belong in this town. 2 weeks ago, I lived in New York City. Now I'm here. I'll do what I can. Caroline could clearly see the looks of guilt growing on the faces of the congregation. The preacher and the organ player wouldn't look at them either. Caroline gulped, wondering what it was that she had gotten herself into. Eli said, "Well, thank you all for your patience and attention. I guess we'd better get going now. There's quite a lot that needs doing." By the time the news of John Waverly's crimes caused a likeness of his face to be sketched and printed all across California, Nevada, and Colorado, he had enough men with him so that he didn't care. There were 14 men behind him, each of whom he had paid in advance with the gold he'd stolen. They were armed with a variety of weapons, pistols, revolvers, rifles, and a few sticks of dynamite. He had been hoping that he could acquire a Gatling gun that he could carry on a cart. That, however, would have required raiding an army fortress, a risk he wasn't willing to take. When Pine Ridge came into view, he checked his gun, made sure he had 5 bullets in it. He had pulled everyone aside and had them clean their guns in order to make sure that they wouldn't jam when needed. One of the men behind him said, "Boss, we going to get paid again after all this is over, right? Like you said?" He looked over his shoulder and squinted back at the man speaking. Was his name Gerald? George? John couldn't quite remember. The man was not a brother. None of them were his brothers. A brother wouldn't ask such a question. A brother would trust him to keep his promises. No, the man could not be called a Waverly. John decided that they would most likely be parting ways after this job was over. 17 people was too big of a gang, anyway, too easy to track. John answered him, even though no answer was required. His previous promise ought to have been enough for anyone. Yes, you'll get the same amount again what you've already had when the job is over. You run away, you sit back, you get nothing. Only participants are paid. Now then, shall we go over the plan again before we start? No one replied to that. John took the silence for approval. He went on, "The main objective is a scarred man what looks more like a beast than a man. You'll know him when you see him. The rest of the town gets burned to the ground. The dynamite we have, we're using that on the railroad tracks near 4 miles east of town and 4 miles west of town. Ain't no marshals gonna come out here. Peter goes east, Howard goes west, each of you take 2 men with you. I will lead the raid into the town. Shoot anyone that moves. Burn any building you come across. Any spoils you find are yours. Horses, gold, food. Anything you want is yours for the taking. You can kill the women. Remember that with the gold you have and you're about to have, you can buy any woman you want. Am I understood?" The men mumbled at first, then gradually spoke up when Peter prodded one of them in the shoulder. Then Peter said, "Let's get a move on. There's work to be done, and it won't do itself." John dug his spurs into the ribcage of his horse. The horse responded at once, picking up speed. Wind gusted through his hair. He cracked a smile. For the first time in a long time, the healing wound in his stomach didn't hurt. He growled to himself, "I'm coming for you, beast. Time to put you down." Chapter 11. The gang not only came earlier than Eli expected, they came in greater numbers than Eli thought they would. He had been taking care of the horses that the gang had left behind the last time. They had not been taken very good care of, they were malnourished and had been ridden hard. Eli took it upon himself to bring them back to health, mostly because there was nothing else to do. Nobody had bothered to misbehave while he was sheriff, though he was sure the town's troublemakers would eventually grow tired of behaving. He saw the Waverly gang from a distance, and that only by accident. Had he been inside his office, or patrolling the town, he would not have seen anything. They were still distant, though Eli could see well enough to tell that they were carrying a considerable amount of iron between them. He also saw 2 groups of 3 each split off from the rest. That left 11 men riding with a deliberate, yet fast, pace. They would soon be upon the town. He left the horses where they were. He went into the streets and called out as loud as he could manage, "They are here. The Waverly boys are here. Come out if you want to fight. Hide yourselves if you do not. They are here." Caroline had been looking over the train schedules and fares, thinking that her time in Pine Ridge would soon come to an end. She had yet to secure employment, and she had been living in Eli's house the entire time, depending on his charity. With all her heart, she had hoped that something romantic would have developed between her and Eli, but it hadn't. Clearly, she was the only one with feelings. She'd grown to not only respect him but admire him. He'd overcome so much and yet still was good and kind and worthy. She feared she was falling in love with him, all the more reason to leave town if her love wasn't going to be returned. She couldn't help seeing the irony of having worked 16-hour days in New York, and then turning around to not being able to find any employment at all in Colorado. She wasn't happy depending on someone else for her livelihood. It didn't matter that she tried her best to keep the house clean and the property well kept. She still felt useless. She had been going to see Violet, having it in mind to see if she had any ideas for work when she heard Eli give warning that the Waverly boys had come once more. Terror gripped her heart, and she struggled to keep her composure. In the few days that had passed since Eli called for aid from the local congregation, Caroline had no idea who would really stand with him. She had practiced every day with her rifle, which she now carried around with her wherever she went. She had thought herself to be increasing in proficiency, until she heard the fear in his voice. Then she realized that with only a few days' worth of practice, she could not hope to match the lifetime of experience that the Waverly boys no doubt had. It would be a miracle if she could manage to avoid being slaughtered within the first 5 minutes of fighting. Nevertheless, she would go. She wouldn't let Eli stand alone. He had already done so much for her. As she hurried down the street, she saw people barring themselves inside their houses. She was surprised at how they didn't want to help when he asked, yet they believed him when he said that a threat was on its way. Perhaps they would feel differently when she lay dead in the street, bullet holes all through her body. She had no doubt that was how she would end, and in a short amount of time as well. Caroline found Eli in his office, where she had expected to find him. Rather than giving into panic, Eli had pulled out as many weapons and bullets as he had access to. He strapped bullets across his chest, with one revolver on each hip. He carried a shotgun on his back, one that looked too heavy for her to bear. He looked like a walking arsenal, yet from the way he was acting, Caroline had the notion that he didn't think it was enough. He looked up from his study of the ammunition. He was busy separating boxes of shells from boxes of bullets. "They've caught us by surprise, I'm afraid. We'll have to fight a defensive battle. We're outnumbered. We can't hope to match them in an open engagement. We have mere moments. You sure you want to do this? Are you prepared? I'd just as soon you hid like the rest of the town." Caroline wasn't sure that she was ready or that she'd ever be. All she knew was that she couldn't leave Eli's side. I am ready. But, are we going to die? It's possible. I will do my best. I'll do my best to keep you safe. We can't escape from them. They are too many. It looks like they sent 2 parties, one to the east and one to the west. Probably to catch us if we try to run. We must stand, and we must do what we can. Caroline had never thought about her death before. She didn't want to die. Yet, when she looked back on her life, she saw that she hadn't done much of anything worthwhile. She hadn't left her mark on the world. She was ordinary and plain. The most that she had ever hoped for was to live honestly enough and decently enough that she had nothing to regret. Now she regretted having nothing to regret. Then I must tell you, before we begin, she said. Tell me what? She let the words rush out of her, sure that she would never get another chance. She couldn't wait. There was no time. I love you, Eli Bartlett. I'd like to marry you, if we survive this. You're a good man. No, everyone sees that, but I do. You've been nicer to me than anyone else in my life. I hope you feel the same way. He went still, so still she wasn't sure if he'd heard her right. Then he visibly swallowed, and his face held such a look of wonder that she nearly wept. He opened his arms and wrapped them around her. She could feel the weight of his revolvers against her hips. I love you, too. So much. So very much. His voice was thick and coarse. You're the only one who sees me for who I really am. If today we are to die, I want to die together with you. I suppose, I've been a fool. I should have told you this days ago. I'm sorry. You're a wonderful woman, Caroline. Then, we can. Before she could finish her question, Violet burst through the door. Caroline pushed herself away from Eli, then coughed into the back of her hand. Violet looked at the two of them. I'm here. I'll help. Tell me what to do. Then the first shot rang out, a lot closer than Caroline would have suspected. Chapter 12. Eli knelt behind a window while he took aim with his revolver. He breathed in and breathed out and tried to stay as calm as possible. They were now close enough so that he could see their eyes. He hoped that they would turn back, think the town was empty and turn back. That was a foolish hope, he knew. Yet it was one that he desperately wanted to be true. Ruined Hat Man, who had gained another hole in his hat since Eli had last seen him, was at the front of the party. Eli didn't see any other people he recognized. They were ruffians, one and all, citizens of the road who had likely been scooped up from wherever the leader happened to find them. The Hat Man held his gun high, the barrel pointed toward the sky, and fired it again. This time, the shot reverberated through the town just as it had the last time he had come. Then just as Eli took aim at him through the window, he and his men took cover. He shouted in a voice that clearly meant business. Beast Man, best y'all come on out now. You with the scar, come on out now. It's just you we want. Present yourself to us, and we'll leave just the way we came. Stay hiding like everyone else, and I'll burn through this city until I find you. No one will be safe, do you hear? Present yourself and save everyone else. Eli hesitated for a moment. His leg muscles tensed up. He had it in mind to do just that, to see if the man would keep his word. Beside him, Caroline put a hand on his leg. She shook her head. He's lying. Don't trust him. Eli swallowed, sensing the truth of her words. There had been a determined look about each member of the gang. There were too many of them to only apprehend a single man. What was more, they had come straight to town rather than going to his home some ways out of town, which they could have found if they'd only asked around. Ruined Hat Man could have also challenged Eli to a duel. So the approach that he'd taken instead suggested that he'd come with bigger intentions. Before Eli could shout out the reply, the hotel owner stepped out into the street. Eli knew the man as an intransigent, difficult man. But facing down 11 hiding armed men by himself wasn't something Eli expected the other man would have ever done. Ruined Hat Man hollered from behind a water trough, "You ain't the one I'm looking for. I got no quarrel with you. Unless you happen to know where the scarred man might be?" Eli experienced a moment of dread when he realized what their strategy might be. If the townsfolk valued their safety and were willing to take the outlaws at their word, they had more incentive to give Eli up rather than protect him. Given the way they had treated him up until now, he could certainly believe that. The hotel owner called back, "I don't know where he is. I wouldn't tell you in any case. You think you can get what you want just by showing up with guns? This is our town, and we won't let you have it." A gun fired. The bullet went straight through the hotel owner's brain. The man was dead before he even hit the ground. Yet hit he did, and with a sickening thud. John wished that he didn't have to shoot the man. At least, he had hoped for the chance to work up to it. He had been hoping that the scarred man would have the courage to show himself. But then, it was possible that he had been part of a party that had gone off to ride after the Waverly boys. It was also possible that the scarred man didn't actually live in town or had been passing through. Pine Ridge was, after all, a waypoint between New York and San Francisco. He called out, "If he ain't here, and no one is willing to tell me where he is, I guess I'll have to make good on my promise." "Do you want me to do that?" "Because I don't care one way or the other. So, I'll say it one last time. Tell me where the beast man is, the scarred man. Tell me where I can find him, and no one else has to die." John thought it was a good offer, a fair offer. Surely there wasn't anyone in the world who would willingly put themselves in harm's way for someone who looked as bad as the scarred man did. Men like that were outcasts in every town that John had ever known. But something had happened in Pine Ridge that he never would have predicted, never in 100 years. Eli saw the townsfolk slip outside, one by one. Rather than locking themselves away, as he had expected, they had evidently all gone back into their homes and places of business to retrieve their guns. The people were out there by the dozens, one after the other, stealthily sliding behind shops and horses and trees to hide, their guns pointed toward the sound of the voice. Eli soon lost track of how many there were. He slipped out of his office himself, followed by Caroline and Violet. Nevertheless, he still felt nervous. He had no idea what would happen next. He also felt ashamed of having been inside when so many others had already crept outside. Now, the three of them crouched behind a wagon. Eli yelled out, "You know, it occurs to me that we've never been properly introduced, you and me." The leader snarled in response. "Ain't no point of giving my name to someone beastly like you, even if you did manage to pay off all these townsfolk I see slithering around today. Must have taken an awful lot of money. I congratulate you on that, at least. The name is Eli Bartlett. I'm the sheriff of Pine Ridge. Might be you're short of sight right now. They didn't give this to me for nothing." Eli recognized the preacher's voice as he hollered from somewhere to Eli's left. "This man has endured our scorn for as long as he's been here. He's never had a word of complaint against us. He volunteered for this position himself. He was ready to fight you all, even if it meant doing it by himself. I'm the preacher and I say repent and give yourselves up. We should all love another, but, may the Lord forgive me, I'll be damned if I let you kill a man as decent as Eli. I'm sure everyone feels the same. We should have stood with Sheriff Newton. Maybe if we had, he would still be alive. None of us are going to make that same mistake again." Every nerve in Eli's body was on alert. His eyes scanned for even the slightest movement that might belong to the leader or any of his men. "I meant what I said," the leader hollered. "I'm taking the beast with me. I reckon some of you have come out here without any guns at all. Me and my boys." From behind him, someone yelled, "I ain't gonna shoot no preacher man. Don't matter if he's armed or not. There is some lines you just don't cross." There were other mutters, and Eli detected movement and shadows heading back down the street. Eli bit back his smile and yelled, "Now, would you listen at that? Seems like you're going to do this all alone." You still want to kill me? Might be you could, if you're fast enough. You won't survive it, though. One of these good folks will take you down. The leader had clearly had enough. He shouted, "I'll get you." A loud blast followed from somewhere nearby, directly behind Eli. The blast was so strong that Eli felt the earth shudder. And then a choking gurgling sound. Eli froze. Who was it? Was it one of the townsfolk who got shot? And then he saw a body drop onto the street from behind a trough. The gang's leader lay there, choking his own blood while he struggled to breathe. Eli turned around to see his mother holding a smoking gun at eye level. "You ain't never gonna lay a hand on my son, not ever," she spat out, her eyes full of rage. For the first time that Eli could remember in his life, he felt protected. An odd feeling. Odd, yet strangely good. Caroline tugged on his arm. "Sheriff, you want to arrest this man? By the looks of him, I'd say there ain't no need." "Not anymore." He paused and called out, "Preacher, this is a job for you. Give him what comfort you can before he goes." The preacher appeared from behind a horse. "I will do that," he said. Chapter 13. After the funeral of the hotel owner, word spread of what had happened in Pine Ridge. Although the railroad lines had been demolished in two separate places near the town, enough help arrived that both remaining members of the Waverly Boys had been found and arrested. The last Eli had heard, they were waiting for their trial prior to being hanged. One of the stories, depending on who told it, was that the new sheriff of Pine Ridge fought off a dozen armed men all by himself. Another way of telling it was that the entire town had risen up behind their sheriff to drive the outlaws out. Not one of the stories that came back to Eli mentioned how it was his mother who killed John Waverly. Although Eli had it in mind to tell everyone the truth, Violet wanted that part kept quiet. Better, she said, for people to be unsuspecting of her skill with a gun. Eli bought a new suit which he wore to his marriage. His boots were a half size too big, and his shirt sleeves weren't quite long enough, but he still looked quite passable. For all that, Eli held his head high with pride and gratitude during his wedding ceremony to his beloved Caroline. He no longer felt as though his scar defined him. He was just a normal person living in a normal town, with a not-so-normal job. Walking out of the hotel and down the street to the church, Caroline was radiant in her wedding dress. She beamed from ear to ear. The crowd that had gathered to see the wedding all held their breath when she walked down the aisle. The preacher gave a short sermon, recited the wedding ceremony, and the vows were said. Then, when Eli finally had the chance to kiss Caroline, time slowed down so much that he thought it had stopped. Caroline's lips were soft, full, and pressed so hard against his that he had difficulty breathing. She pulled away, and time resumed its normal pace. He heard the preacher's words as if they came from another world. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Though in all truth, you're supposed to kiss the bride after I say that." Eli laughed and kissed Caroline again. The crowd clapped and gave their congratulations and best wishes. After the ceremony, there was a small reception in the hotel. Eli couldn't help but think about the deceased owner and his courage and willingness to stand up for him. He pushed away his solemn thoughts for now, though. He had a beautiful new wife to attend to. They drank punch and ate cake with the crowd until Eli wanted only to be with his wife alone. He leaned toward her and whispered, "Caroline, shall we go?" "Go? Go where?" "I think I'd like to take my bedroom back, if that's all right with you." "Of course, you're welcome to join me if you'd like." She laughed. "That's better than sleeping outside." As they were leaving the hotel, Eli overheard someone say that the hotel would be up for sale now, as the owner hadn't left a will. Caroline heard him, too. She looked at Eli. "How would you feel about me buying and running a hotel?" "And where would you get that kind of money?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. A bank loan? It's free to dream, though, ain't it?" He raised a brow. "Yes, it's free to dream. And I imagine you'd be good at whatever you set your mind to." She smiled and pressed her hands to her chest. Suddenly, the future seems awful bright, husband. He grinned in return. That it does, wife. That is does. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.